Hey, Trinity Church. Kevin Marshall coming to you from downtown Norfolk campus, and I get to bring you the daily devotion today. We're reading in Acts chapter 26, and I'm going to set it up for you a little bit. I'm going to encourage you also to read it because there's just way too much to read, and I've only got about 5 minutes to talk to you this morning. But in this situation in Acts chapter 26, we follow up with Paul. Now, Paul has been in prison in Caesarea for at least a couple of years under the guy who was in charge, a guy by the name of Felix. Felix had put Paul in prison because he was doing it as a favor to the Jews, the chief council and the Sanhedrin, who had been pleading their case and actually trying to kill Paul all along the way. Question for you today is, have you ever been in a situation where you thought, man, that's just not fair? That's just not fair. You know, I'm thinking about how Paul must have felt here. That's just not fair. And if you heard Randy's sermon last Sunday, you know that this is before he even gets shipwrecked on the island of Malta and bitten by the snake that comes out of the fire. Paul had a lot of reasons to think that's just not fair. So we pick up the story here in Acts chapter 26 when a new guy comes on the scene. This guy's name is Festus, and he's the new procurator who is responsible for the financial welfare, the economy, the administration for Caesar over Palestine, which includes Caesarea and Jerusalem and a lot of that region. Now there's another character in the story, King Agrippa, Herod Agrippa II, and he actually isn't in charge, but when Festus goes to Jerusalem, and he meets with the chief priests and the Sanhedrin and the folks of importance there. They bring their case against Paul. Now, Paul's still in prison back in Caesarea. And so Festus is thinking, what do I do here? Now, King Agrippa comes on the scene because he understands Jewish laws and tradition. And so Festus, when King Agrippa is visiting with him in Caesarea, brings up Paul and says, what should we do with this guy? And Agrippa says, I'd like to hear him make his defense. So in Acts chapter 26, we pick up with Paul making his defense, both to Festus and Agrippa and others who were assembled. How does Paul make his defense? What does he do when he's thinking, this isn't fair, I've been imprisoned falsely, I shouldn't be here? He tells his story. That's really all he does. He tells what he knows to be true from his life. He starts out saying, Agrippa, you know me, and I was much like these chief priests. I was actually persecuting those who followed this Jesus of Nazareth. And then he goes on to say that when he was on his way to Damascus to persecute, he encountered Jesus along the way. Maybe you know that story. Here the light, bright light, knocks them down, and he hears a voice from heaven that says, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And he says, who are you? And he says, I'm Jesus of Nazareth. And this is where Paul's conversion occurs. And Paul goes on to explain his story. Nothing more, nothing less. So what's the thing we take away from today's discussion? Maybe you're in a situation where you're thinking, this isn't fair. And maybe you're in a situation where you're thinking, I wouldn't know what to say if I was asked. So I'm going to tell you a different story. True story from going back to April 15th and many years before that. My father-in-law passed away in Houston on April 15th this past year. He was almost 95, and we had shared Jesus and the gospel message with him countless times over decades, almost to the point where I thought, what's the purpose, what's the use? True story. This was Palm Sunday of this last year, where my wife and her brother, they were on the phone with her dad, and they just shared again what they knew to be true about Jesus and the gospel. They shared their story. Now, he'd heard it countless times, as I'm sure even Agrippa had heard it countless times, and others probably had heard it before, this man Jesus and the story of him being resurrected from the dead. But this time, the Lord opened our father and father-in-law's eyes, and he accepted Christ 8 days before he went to be with him. It's never too late. So I'm going to leave you with this as you think about Acts chapter 26 and what Paul was doing, because I think I tend to put Paul on a pedestal, but he was just telling what he knew to be true from his experience of Jesus and the transformative power of the gospel. 1 Peter 3:15 says this, But even if you should suffer for what is right, you are blessed, Do not fear their threats. Do not be frightened. But in your hearts, revere Christ as the Lord, and always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and with respect. So Trinity Church, I pray that these words would go deep in your heart as they're going into mine, and that we would be able to live this day testifying and giving witness to the transformative power of the grace and the mercy of Jesus and the gospel.